you were to swim just a few meters off the coast of Laconia, in southern Greece, you might find yourself drifting above the faint outlines of streets, walls, and rectangular building foundations resting quietly beneath the shallow waters. This place is known as Pavlopetri, and archaeologists believe it is the oldest known submerged city in the world, dating back nearly 5,000 years to the Bronze Age. It is not the Atlantis of myth, with glittering towers and impossible technologies, but something much more ordinary and in its ordinariness, much more revealing. Pavlopetri shows us how real people lived, how they organized their homes, and how a community functioned in an age long before our own. When divers first began charting the site in the late 1960s, they were surprised to discover not just scattered ruins, but a carefully laid out town. There were streets, courtyards, chambers, workshops, and even evidence of a water management system. Imagine, for a moment, walking along one of those straight stone-paved streets, where the houses rose modestly above you, their walls of mud brick and stone now reduced to outlines, the sound of sandals scraping against the earth, the bleating of goats tethered in small courtyards, and the clatter of pottery being carried from one workshop to another. All of these would have been ordinary sounds in Pavlopetri. The settlement was located near an important shipping channel, giving it access to trade routes across the Mediterranean. This was not an isolated fishing village, but a connected hub where goods and ideas moved between cultures. Archaeologists have found pottery from Crete, the Cyclades, and even farther afield, showing that the people of Pavlopetri were part of a much wider network of exchange. This meant they would have known something of other peoples, other languages, and other customs, even though their own lives revolved around their coastal town. But perhaps the most striking thing about Pavlopetri is how ordinary it seems. Here was a community of perhaps a few hundred people living in houses with multiple rooms, grinding grain, making cloth, shaping clay into useful pots, and launching small boats from the shore. They were not kings, not warriors whose names echo in myth, but regular people living in a predictable rhythm of work and rest. That predictability is what makes Pavlopetri so fascinating. It offers a window into the daily existence of Bronze Age Greeks, where every chip pot and every wall foundation tells us about how they structured their days. Of course, Pavlopetri did not last forever. At some point, whether through a series of earthquakes, rising sea levels, or gradual coastal erosion, the land gave way to the sea, and the town slipped beneath the surface. Unlike more dramatic stories of civilizations destroyed overnight, Pavlopetri's end seems to have been slow. The town was gradually overtaken by water until it became uninhabitable. People must have left their homes one by one, carrying what they could, abandoning heavy items, and looking back as the sea crept in. In this quiet and undramatic departure lies the human story, not a sudden catastrophe, but the patient encroachment of the natural world. Archaeologists working there today still find the traces of daily life frozen in place. Pottery shards lay scattered across the seabed, some with decorations, others plain and utilitarian. Foundations mark the places where small families must have lived, their rooms arranged in patterns that suggest cooking, sleeping, and working spaces. A small square has been identified as a likely marketplace, where people may have borrowed fish for grain or cloth for tools. What was once bustling with voices is now utterly silent, and the water presses down on everything. What makes Pavlopetri particularly remarkable is its scale and preservation. Many submerged settlements are fragmentary, little more than isolated structures, but Pavlopetri still shows an entire urban plan. The streets, aligned at right angles, suggest intentional design rather than haphazard growth. Scholars point out that this indicates a level of planning, often associated with later Greek city-states, yet here it was thousands of years earlier. It raises the question, how much of Greek civilization, as we know it, was prefigured in these forgotten coastal towns that never made it into the history books? And yet, for all this significance, Pavlopetri is not a tourist hotspot. Its remains lie just beneath shallow waters, vulnerable to anchors, fishing nets, and careless swimmers. Local authorities and UNESCO have worked to protect the site, but like so many submerged places, it is fragile. The waves that whisper above it do not care for its age or importance. It is worth pausing to think of what Pavlopetri means in a broader sense. This was not a grand capital like Mycenae or a legendary battlefield like Troy. This was a modest town, one of countless that must have existed along ancient coasts. Most of them are gone, their names never recorded, their people forgotten. Pavlopetri endures only because the sea preserved its layout in a way the land could not. It gives us a glimpse of what was once common, what was once everyday life, and in doing so, it shows us how fragile ordinary history really is. If you close your eyes, you might picture yourself drifting slowly over those stone outlines, the water shifting quietly around you. A fish darts through what was once a doorway. A crab picks its way across a street where children once played. Time collapses in these moments, the Bronze Age and the present sharing the same space, separated only by the element of water. It is both haunting and strangely peaceful. But there is an unresolved question at the heart of Pavlopetri. Why here, and why then? Why did people choose this specific spot to build such a well-planned town, only for it to vanish beneath the waves? Were they aware of the risks, or did the sea's slow rise take them by surprise? And perhaps more importantly, how many other towns like this are still waiting, hidden under the water, their stories untold? To truly appreciate Pavlopetri, you have to think not just about its ruins, but about the rhythms of life that once animated those ruins. Archaeology tends to focus on artifacts, measurements, and dates. But beneath those technical details lies something more human, the quiet repetition of daily tasks, the patterns of a society that was both ordinary and remarkable. Imagine, for a moment, waking up in one of Pavlopetri's houses around the year 2000 BC. The first light of dawn would filter through small openings in the walls, illuminating earthen floors. A fire, banked overnight, would be stirred to life. Someone would grind grain on a stone quern, the rhythmic scrape echoing softly. Children might be sent to gather water, carrying small clay vessels toward the shore. The scent of smoke would blend with the salt of the sea as the town slowly stirred into motion. The houses themselves were not monumental. They were modest, rectangular structures, some with 2 or 3 rooms. Mud brick walls rose above stone foundations. The roofs were likely made of wood and reeds, materials long since vanished, yet the placement of these houses lined along streets, facing toward courtyards, shows careful thought. Families valued both privacy and connection. Courtyards acted as shared spaces where weaving might be done, or pots repaired, or meals prepared in clay ovens. It was in these spaces, more than anywhere else, that the pulse of Pavlopetri beat strongest. What did people eat here? Archaeologists suggest a diet of bread, olives, fish, and vegetables, supplemented by meat on special occasions. The proximity to the sea meant that fishing was central, but Pavlopetri's location also gave access to inland trade. Grain would have been brought in, olives pressed for oil, and wine fermented in jars. The broken fragments of storage vessels tell us as much about subsistence as about ritual. This was a community, sustained by the staples of the Mediterranean, much as communities still are today. The role of the sea cannot be overstated. Pavlopetri was positioned perfectly for maritime trade. Small boats would have launched from the shore, carrying goods along the coastline, connecting this little town to larger centers. But the sea was also a threat. Every storm, every shift in tide, and every gradual rise of water levels was a reminder that the community existed in a delicate balance with nature. That tension between sustenance and danger is inscribed in Pavlopetri's history and, ultimately, in its fate. When divers swim over Pavlopetri today, they see more than just ruins. They see a blueprint of memory preserved by water. But to archaeologists, the preservation is fragile. Pavlopetri lies at a shallow depth, making it vulnerable to modern activities. Anchors from boats can tear through walls that have stood for millennia. Fishing nets can drag pottery shards far from their context. Even careless swimmers or divers can disturb sediments that hold precious clues. Protecting Pavlopetri has become an urgent task, not just for Greek authorities but also for organizations like UNESCO, which in recent years has listed the site as an endangered cultural heritage. Location. One innovative approach has been the creation of digital reconstructions using 3D laser scanning and sonar. Archaeologists have built models that allow people to walk through Pavlopetri virtually. These models are not only useful for researchers but also for the public. In them, you can see streets lined with houses, courtyards open to the sky, and pathways leading toward the sea. It becomes easier to imagine what life must have looked like, to visualize people moving through those spaces, carrying pots, tending fires, and sharing meals. And yet, despite these reconstructions, one cannot escape the eerie quality of Pavlopetri. To visit it, even virtually, is to feel the silence of a place abandoned. No voices call out, and no footsteps ring on stone. The absence is almost tangible. Perhaps that is why Pavlopetri fascinates people, not because it was extraordinary, but because it was so ordinary, and yet it disappeared. It is a mirror for all human communities, reminding us that what feels permanent in one age can vanish in another. The story of Pavlopetri also connects to a much broader theme: the relationship between humans and water. Across the world, countless settlements have been lost to rising seas, shifting rivers, or sudden floods. Pavlopetri is unique only because it is so well preserved. But think of all the other coastal towns that once dotted shorelines, whose remains are now buried under silt or waves. They held families, marketplaces, workshops, and lives. Their stories are mostly forgotten, but Pavlopetri stands as a representative, speaking for them all. Scholars often compare Pavlopetri to the legendary city of Atlantis, but the truth is that Pavlopetri is far more valuable. Atlantis, whether myth or allegory, remains unattainable. Pavlopetri is real. You can swim above it, photograph it, map it, and hold its pottery in your hands. It is not a story invented by Plato, but a reality uncovered by archaeologists. And in that reality, we see the roots of our own urbanism, the need to plan streets, to manage resources, to trade, and to build community. Atlantis may capture the imagination, but Pavlopetri grounds us in fact. There is also the matter of legacy. Though Pavlopetri's name does not appear in the records of ancient Greece, its memory lives on in the very fabric of the region. Nearby settlements would have absorbed its refugees, carrying with them skills, traditions, and stories. Perhaps the planning of later Greek cities was influenced in some small way by the forgotten architects of Pavlopetri. History rarely moves in straight lines. It bends and weaves, with even small towns shaping larger patterns. In thinking about Pavlopetri, one cannot help but reflect on the fragility of modern coastal life. Just as Bronze Age inhabitants faced the creeping rise of the sea, so do many communities today. Scientists warn of rising oceans and of storms and floods that will redraw coastlines. To look at Pavlopetri is to glimpse a possible future, a reminder that no settlement, however permanent it feels, is immune to nature's changes. The drowned streets of Pavlopetri whisper this truth to us across thousands of years. As you let your mind drift across its silent ruins, imagine the small square once filled with chatter. Picture the workshops echoing with the sound of stone tools on clay. See the courtyards where families gathered in the evening light. All of the life has vanished, but its traces remain, faint but enduring, beneath the waves. And yet perhaps the greatest unresolved question of Pavlopetri is not about how it was built, or why it was lost, but how much of human history lies hidden, just like it out of sight waiting underwater preserved in silence. How many more Pavlopetris are still undiscovered beneath seas, lakes, and rivers across the world? And what will they tell us about the countless ordinary lives that once made history, only to sink quietly into memory? To truly appreciate Pavlopetri, you have to think not just about its ruins, but about the rhythms of life that once animated those ruins. Archaeology tends to focus on artifacts, measurements, and dates. But beneath those technical details lies something more human, the quiet repetition of daily tasks. The patterns of a society that was both ordinary and remarkable. Imagine, for a moment, waking up in one of Pavlopetri's houses around the year 2000 BC. The first light of dawn would filter through small openings in the walls, illuminating earthen floors. A fire, banked overnight, would be stirred to life. Someone would grind grain on a stone quern, the rhythmic scrape echoing softly. Children might be sent to gather water, carrying small clay vessels toward the shore. The scent of smoke would blend with the salt of the sea as the town slowly stirred into motion. The houses themselves were not monumental. They were modest, rectangular structures, some with 2 or 3 rooms. Mud brick walls rose above stone foundations. The roofs were likely made of wood and reeds, materials long since vanished, yet the placement of these houses lined along streets, facing toward courtyards, shows careful thought. Families valued both privacy and connection. Courtyards acted as shared spaces where weaving might be done, or pots repaired, or meals prepared in clay ovens. It was in these spaces, more than anywhere else, that the pulse of Pavlopetri beat strongest. What did people eat here? Archaeologists suggest a diet of bread, olives, fish, and vegetables, supplemented by meat on special occasions. The proximity to the sea meant that fishing was central. But Pavlopetri's location also gave access to inland trade. Grain would have been brought in, olives pressed for oil, and wine fermented in jars. The broken fragments of storage vessels tell us as much about subsistence as about ritual. This was a community, sustained by the staples of the Mediterranean, much as communities still are today. The role of the sea cannot be overstated. Pavlopetri was positioned perfectly for maritime trade. Small boats would have launched from the shore, carrying goods along the coastline, connecting this little town to larger centers. But the sea was also a threat. Every storm, every shift in tide, and every gradual rise of water levels was a reminder that the community existed in a delicate balance with nature. That tension between sustenance and danger is inscribed in Pavlopetri's history and, ultimately, in its fate. When divers swim over Pavlopetri today, they see more than just ruins. They see a blueprint of memory preserved by water. But to archaeologists, the preservation is fragile. Pavlopetri lies at a shallow depth, making it vulnerable to modern activities. Anchors from boats can tear through walls that have stood for millennia. Fishing nets can drag pottery shards far from their context. Even careless swimmers or divers can disturb sediments that hold precious clues. Protecting Pavlopetri has become an urgent task, not just for Greek authorities but also for organizations like UNESCO, which in recent years has listed the site as an endangered cultural heritage. Location. One innovative approach has been the creation of digital reconstructions using 3D laser scanning and sonar. Archaeologists have built models that allow people to walk through Pavlopetri virtually. These models are not only useful for researchers but also for the public. In them, you can see streets lined with houses, courtyards open to the sky, and pathways leading toward the sea. It becomes easier to imagine what life must have looked like, to visualize people moving through those spaces, carrying pots, tending fires, and sharing meals. And yet, despite these reconstructions, one cannot escape the eerie quality of Pavlopetri. To visit it, even virtually, is to feel the silence of a place abandoned. No voices call out, and no footsteps ring on stone. The absence is almost tangible. Perhaps that is why Pavlopetri fascinates people, not because it was extraordinary, but because it was so ordinary, and yet it disappeared. It is a mirror for all human communities, reminding us that what feels permanent in one age can vanish in another. The story of Pavlopetri also connects to a much broader theme: the relationship between humans and water. Across the world, countless settlements have been lost to rising seas, shifting rivers, or sudden floods. Pavlopetri is unique only because it is so well preserved. But think of all the other coastal towns that once dotted shorelines, whose remains are now buried under silt or waves. They'd held families, marketplaces, workshops, and lives. Their stories are mostly forgotten, but Pavlopetri stands as a representative, speaking for them all. Scholars often compare Pavlopetri to the legendary city of Atlantis. But the truth is that Pavlopetri is far more valuable. Atlantis, whether myth or allegory, remains unattainable. Pavlopetri is real. You can swim above it, photograph it, map it, and hold its pottery in your hands. It is not a story invented by Plato, but a reality uncovered by archaeologists. And in that reality, we see the roots of our own urbanism, the need to plan streets, to manage resources, to trade, and to build community. Atlantis may capture the imagination, but Pavlopetri grounds us in fact. There is also the matter of legacy. Though Pavlopetri's name does not appear in the records of ancient Greece, its memory lives on in the very fabric of the region. Nearby settlements would have absorbed its refugees, carrying with them skills, traditions, and stories. Perhaps the planning of later Greek cities was influenced in some small way by the forgotten architects of Pavlopetri. History rarely moves in straight lines. It bends and weaves, with even small towns shaping larger patterns. In thinking about Pavlopetri, one cannot help but reflect on the fragility of modern coastal life. Just as Bronze Age inhabitants faced the creeping rise of the sea, so do many communities today. Scientists warn of rising oceans and of storms and floods that will redraw coastlines. To look at Pavlopetri is to glimpse a possible future reminder that no settlement, however permanent it feels, is immune to nature's changes. The drowned streets of Pavlopetri whisper this truth to us across thousands of years. As you let your mind drift across its silent ruins, imagine the small square once filled with chatter. Picture the workshops echoing with the sound of stone tools on clay. See the courtyards where families gathered in the evening light. All of the life has vanished, but its traces remain, faint but enduring, beneath the waves. And yet perhaps the greatest unresolved question of Pavlopetri is not about how it was built, or why it was lost, but how much of human history lies hidden, just like it out of sight waiting underwater preserved in silence. How many more Pavlopetris are still undiscovered beneath seas, lakes, and rivers across the world? And what will they tell us about the countless ordinary lives that once made history, only to sink quietly into memory? Off the western coast of India, where the Arabian Sea laps against the shores of Gujarat, lies a place that has long existed at the intersection of myth and archaeology. It is called Dwarka, a name that means the gateway, and in Indian tradition it is said to have been the magnificent city of Lord Krishna, the divine hero of the Mahabharata. To Hindus, Dwarka is not just a city, but a sacred memory, a place where gods once walked as men. Yet beneath the waves near modern Dwarka, divers have found ruins that suggest the myth may hold traces of history. The story begins with the ancient texts, according to the Mahabharata and the Bhagavata Purana. Krishna founded Dwarka after leaving Mathura. It was described as a fortified city of immense beauty, built with walls of gleaming stone, adorned with palaces, gates, and bustling markets. It was said to have been protected by the sea itself. And yet, when Krishna's earthly mission ended, the ocean swallowed the city for centuries. This tale was thought of as a myth, a spiritual allegory rather than a literal event. But in the late 20th century, underwater surveys off the coast of Gujarat revealed something unexpected: stone structures, streets, and walls lying submerged in the sea. Not unlike the mythic description of Dwarka's disappearance. In 1983, the Marine Archaeology Unit of the Archaeological Survey of India (ASI) began systematic explorations near the modern town of Dwarka. What they discovered were massive stone blocks, jetty-like structures, and indications of habitation dating back several millennia. Divers traced lines of walls and platforms that hinted at an organized settlement. The dimensions were strikingly large, suggesting that this was no mere fishing village, but something far more substantial. Pottery fragments, stone anchors, and tools found at the site pointed to a community engaged in maritime trade. This was no surprise, for the Arabian Sea has long been a highway of commerce, connecting India with Mesopotamia, Egypt, and the Persian Gulf. Dwarka's location was strategic, serving as a gateway for goods flowing inland and outward across the sea. Just as Krishna's city was described as thriving and wealthy, so does the archaeological Dwarka appear to have been a hub of exchange. And yet, it is important to step back from the grandeur of myth and consider the everyday life that these ruins suggest. The stones lying beneath the waves once supported homes where families ate simple meals of grain and lentils, where children ran in small courtyards, and where fishermen mended nets before setting out to sea. Temples may have risen above the town, but equally important were the workshops, where pottery was shaped, ropes twisted, and wooden boats repaired. In this way, Dwarka was not only a city of legend, but also a place of the ordinary of labor, trade, and routine. The anchors found underwater provide especially interesting evidence. Many are of a type also discovered in Egypt and Mesopotamia, suggesting long-distance maritime contact. This means that the people of Dwarka, whoever they were not isolated, but part of a broader web of trade stretching across the ancient world. Imagine ships setting sail from its harbor, carrying cotton textiles, beads, or spices, and returning with metals, precious stones, or foreign ceramics. The bustling of a port town is often overlooked in myth, but archaeology shows us the reality. A city defined as much by its docks as by its palaces. The submergence of Dwarka, like Pavla Petri, raises questions about the power of the sea. Geological studies suggest that parts of the Gujarat coast have been affected by tectonic shifts and sea level changes for thousands of years. It is possible that an earthquake, combined with rising tides, gradually engulfed the city. The myths of the sea swallowing Dwarka may therefore echo real events, remembered and rattled across generations until they became part of sacred narrative. This blurring of history and myth is a pattern seen in many ancient cultures, where natural disasters were woven into the fabric of divine stories. Standing on the shore of modern Dwarka today, pilgrims look out to the sea with reverence. They believe that beneath those waves lies the city of Krishna himself, a place of eternal sanctity. The archaeology does not confirm the myth in its entirety, but it does confirm that a city of considerable scale once stood there, only to vanish beneath the ocean. This intersection where faith meets artifact and story meets ruin makes Dwarka uniquely compelling. But perhaps what is most striking about Dwarka is the way its story connects the sacred and the ordinary. For believers, it is a holy city tied to divinity. For archaeologists, it is a settlement that reveals the mechanics of trade and urban planning in early India. For us, as listeners drifting toward sleep, it is both a reminder that behind the dazzling stories of gods and heroes were real people who lived, worked, and eventually abandoned their homes to the sea. And so, as you pictured Dwarka, try not to imagine only the palaces described in scripture. Instead, picture the stone jetties, now submerged, where merchants once unloaded their goods. Picture the fishermen's nets drying in the sun, the smell of salt and smoke in the air. Picture the women grinding grain on stone slabs, their children laughing nearby, oblivious to the tides that would one day erase their world. This was Dwarka, to not only a city of gods, but a city of people. Still, the great unresolved question lingers. Were the Dwarka of myth and the Dwarka of archaeology the same? Were the stones divers found beneath the Arabian Sea truly part of Krishna's city? Or do they belong to an even older, forgotten settlement that became absorbed into legend? And if so, how many other such cities lie hidden along the coast of India? Their stories waiting to be uncovered, their myths waiting to be reinterpreted. When archaeologists first began working off the coast of Gujarat in the 1980s, they were not entirely sure what they would find. The Mahabharata described a city of gleaming towers and bustling avenues, but ancient texts are not straightforward maps of history. Yet, As the divers of the Archaeological Survey of India lowered themselves into the waters off modern Dwarka, they saw unmistakable traces of walls and platforms. The stone blocks did not appear natural. They had been shaped, cut, and placed by human hands. Slowly, a picture began to emerge of a submerged town, large enough to have sustained a vibrant community. The ruins stretch across a surprisingly wide area, with rectangular blocks, foundation walls, and jetty-like structures spread over several square kilometers. One of the most compelling finds was a set of stone anchors, some weighing hundreds of kilograms. These anchors, pierced with multiple holes, matched examples found in ancient Near Eastern harbors, suggesting that Dwarka was part of a vast maritime trade system to handle such heavy anchors. The people of Dwarka must have built ships large and sturdy enough to cross long distances. This was not a town of isolated fishermen, but a cosmopolitan port. The artifacts discovered further confirm this impression. Pottery shards, dating back several millennia, show styles consistent with those of the late Harappan period. Around 2000 BCE, beads made of semi-precious stones such as carnelian and agate hint at a society skilled in craftsmanship. These beads, highly prized in Mesopotamia, may have been exported abroad. Dwarka's inhabitants were not just traders but also artisans, creating goods that connected them to cultures hundreds of miles away. The archaeology also reveals domestic life, often overlooked in the grand narratives of myth. Foundations of rectangular houses indicate multi-room dwellings, where families live together in close quarters. The presence of hearths and grinding stones suggests that meals were prepared in a simple but communal fashion. Inscriptions have not been found, but from these material traces we can reconstruct a community concerned with the same daily matters as any other: food, shelter, trade, and family. One particularly striking discovery is evidence of stone jetties, which would have allowed ships to dock directly at the settlement. This suggests a planned port, not just a natural harbor. The jetties, built of large rectangular blocks, are now submerged several meters underwater. Their alignment indicates forethought and engineering skill. For a coastal town to build such structures thousands of years ago demonstrates a sophisticated understanding of both stonework and maritime needs. Yet Dwarka's archaeology has not been without controversy. Some scholars argue that the submerged remains date back only a few centuries, pointing to the possibility of later medieval structures. Others, however, insist on their Bronze Age origins, citing the style of anchors and pottery. The debate illustrates how difficult underwater archaeology can be. Currents scatter artifacts, sediments shift, and dating methods become less precise. Unlike a dry excavation where layers can be peeled back in sequence, the sea erases context, leaving only scattered clues. Still, the findings align uncannily with descriptions in the Mahabharata. The texts speak of a city that was eventually claimed by the ocean, and here, off the coast of Gujarat, lie ruins that seem to echo that story. Does this mean the archaeology proves the myth? Not exactly, but it does mean that the myth may have been grounded in a real memory, a coastal settlement, swallowed by the sea, remembered and reveled for generations until it became the city of Krishna. The Mahabharata describes Dwarka as having 70,000 palaces, adorned with jewels and metals, a number that is clearly symbolic rather than literal. Yet beneath the exaggeration lies a kernel of truth. Dwarka was remembered as wealthy, bustling, and important. The archaeology supports this. Maritime trade, skilled craftsmanship, and planned harbors all point to a thriving community. The myth magnified the details, but the foundation was real for the people who lived there. However, Dwarka was not a myth. It was home. They would have risen each morning to the cry of seabirds, to the sound of waves against stone jetties, and to the creak of wooden boats. Fishermen would have set out at dawn, returning with their catch to markets near the harbor. Merchants may have overseen shipments of bees or cotton, negotiating prices with traders from afar. Children would have played among the courtyards of houses, their laughter mingling with the steady rhythm of daily life. The The grandeur of myth does not erase the ordinariness of existence. It was, in fact, built upon it. The submergence of Dwarka remains a topic of scientific investigation. Geological surveys suggest that the coastline of Gujarat has shifted dramatically over millennia, with earthquakes and sea level rise reshaping the land. It is likely that Dwarka did not sink in a single dramatic event, but rather through a series of natural changes, land subsidence, tectonic shifts, and encroaching tides. For its inhabitants, this would have meant gradual loss, wells turning brackish, floods damaging homes, and the sea taking back more land each decade. The myth of the ocean suddenly swallowing the city may well be a compressed memory of centuries of decline. To walk or rather swim among the ruins today is to sense that slow inevitability. Stone walls fade into sand, outlines blur, and what was once the center of a community lies silent. Yet the silence is deceptive, for each anchor and potsherd speaks volumes. They tell us that people lived here, that they built, traded, and adapted until the sea forced them to move elsewhere. What makes Dwarka especially compelling is the layering of meaning. For believers, it is Krishna's city, holy and eternal. For archaeologists, it is a settlement that illuminates the maritime connections of early India. For us, it is both at once an example of how myth and history intertwine and how the ordinary can be remembered as extraordinary when rattled across generations. And so, as we think of Dwarka, we might ask ourselves, what matters more, the precise dating of its stones, or the continuity of its memory? Is it more important that Dwarka be proven as Krishna's city, or that its story has kept alive the memory of a community long after its disappearance? Perhaps the truth lies not in choosing, but in recognizing that myth and archaeology are both ways of preserving the past, one through narrative, the other through artifact. Still, one haunting question lingers beneath the waves. How much of Dwarka remains undiscovered? Divers have mapped only parts of the submerged area. The sea hides more walls buried under sand, artifacts waiting to be uncovered, and stories yet to be told. The city, in all its fullness, lies beyond our reach, half in myth, half in sediment. When people speak of Dwarka today, they are often referring to the modern city of Dwarka on the coast of Gujarat, a pilgrimage site, with temples, rituals, and daily offerings to Lord Krishna. But when archaeologists dive offshore, what they find is something more haunting, a silent world of stone blocks and ruined jetties scattered across the seabed. The two Dwarkas, mythic and archaeological, sacred and submerged, exist side by side, connected not only by geography, but also by memory. The myth of Dwarka, preserved in the Mahabharata and Bhagavata Purana, has endured for thousands of years. In these texts, Dwarka is portrayed as a city of wonder, shimmering with wealth, its streets crowded with palaces and temples. It is said to have been constructed at Krishna's command, built in a single day by divine architects. And yet, when Krishna departed this world, the sea rose and swallowed it whole. Believers visit Dwarka today not only to honor Krishna, but also to pay respect to this vision of a city claimed by the ocean. Archaeology, however, paints a quieter picture. The stones on the seabed are not dazzling palaces, but rectangular foundations, stone anchors, pottery fragments, and jetties. They belong not to gods, but to ordinary people, sailors, merchants, artisans, and families who made their lives at the edge of the sea. In this sense, the myth and the ruins are not opposed but complementary. The myth remembers the grandeur, archaeology remembers the daily life. Together, they offer a fuller understanding of Dwarka than either could alone. The life of a maritime town. To imagine Dwarka as it once was, you must think of a maritime town in motion. Ships would have approached from the Arabian Sea, sails billowing, anchors ready to drop into the water. The jetties, now submerged, would have been crowded with people unloading cargo sacks of grain, bundles of textiles, jars of spices, and perhaps beads gleaming in the sunlight. The air would have been thick with the smell of salt, fish, and smoke from cooking fires. Within the town, Workshops clattered with the sound of chisels and grinding stones. Women wove cloth, shaped clay, and prepared meals. Children ran barefoot across courtyards, their laughter mixing with the braying of donkeys or the cries of seabirds overhead. Priests tended the shrines, merchants haggled in markets, and sailors told stories of foreign lands. In all these details, Dwarka was like many other towns across the ancient world a place of work, worship, and community. But unlike most other towns, Dwarka carried the weight of myth. Even as it thrived in the everyday, its memory was being woven into epic tales. For the people who lived there, the sea was both protector and threat. Its bounty sustained them, but its slow encroachment could not be stopped. Over time, as parts of the settlement slipped beneath the waves, the story of its submergence became inseparable from its identity. Submergence and memory. The science of Dwarka's drowning points to tectonic shifts and rising seas. Geological evidence suggests that earthquakes along the Gujarat coast may have lowered land levels, allowing the sea to advance. Over centuries, storms and tides carried away walls and structures, leaving only scattered foundations. What the texts remember as a sudden act of divine will may have been a long process of natural change, witnessed by generations and later told as a single dramatic event. This pattern of myth growing from memory is familiar across the world. In Greece, the destruction of Helike by an earthquake and tsunami gave rise to Atlantis-like stories. In the Pacific, islanders preserve oral traditions of floods and sinking lands. In Dwarka, the slow drowning of a town became the sacred narrative of Krishna's departure. It is a reminder of how human communities transform disaster into meaning, turning ordinary loss into time. Less story. The modern Dwarka today. Pilgrims flock to the Dwarkadish temple in Gujarat, one of the holiest shrines in Hinduism. They bathe in the Gandhi River, offer prayers, and look out toward the sea where Krishna's city is said to lie. For many, the archaeology beneath the waves is less important than the enduring sacredness of the site. Belief keeps Dwarka alive, even if the ancient stones are silent. Archaeologists, meanwhile, continue their cautious explorations. Each dive uncovers new fragments. An anchor here, a block of dressed stone there, a piece of pottery lodged in the sand. Slowly, a picture of ancient Dwarka takes shape. It was a trading hub, a settlement of significant scale, and a place where maritime technology flourished. These details may lack the sparkle of jewels and palaces, but they reveal something more profound: the reality of how ancient people lived. Dwarka's legacy. In many ways, Dwarka embodies the tension between faith and evidence. For believers, no proof is necessary. The city of Krishna exists because tradition says so. For archaeologists, the task is to piece together a settlement from scattered ruins. And for us, the listeners, there is value in both. The myth tells us how people imagined their past, while the archaeology tells us how they actually lived. Dwarka, then, is both memory and reality, both legend and town. But Dwarka also carries a message for today. Its submergence is not only a matter of ancient history, it is also a warning. Rising seas and shifting coastlines continue to threaten human settlements around the world. From island nations in the Pacific to coastal cities across continents, the story of Dwarka is playing out again in slow motion. As we face these challenges, Dwarka reminds us that no city, however great, is beyond the reach of the sea. Closing reflection as you drift with these thoughts. Imagine yourself floating above the ruins of Dwarka, the sunlight rippling across the seabed. The outlines of walls stretch below you, silent but stubbornly present. A fish darts through what was once a doorway. The seaweed sways gently where once stood a market stall. Time collapses here. Myth and history, past and present, all mingling in the stillness of the water. And yet, one question refuses to fade. How much of Dwarka still lies hidden, waiting beneath the sea? Have we seen only the edges of a much larger city, its palaces and shrines still buried under silt? Will future divers uncover more, or will the sea keep its secrets? Dwarka remains, like so many drowned towns, a half-told story inviting us to wonder, to believe, and to remember. Off the southern coast of Japan, near the island of Yonaguni, the sea hides something that has puzzled divers and archaeologists alike for decades. Beneath the clear waters lie massive stone formations that look uncannily like steps, terraces, and platforms carved by human hands. To some, this place is Japan's Atlantis, a sunken city from a forgotten age. To others, it is nothing more than natural rock, shaped by centuries of ocean currents and tectonic shifts. Whatever the truth, Yonaguni is one of the most haunting underwater mysteries in the world. The story begins in 1986, when a local diver exploring the waters around Yonaguni stumbled across the formations. What he saw looked like a monumental staircase descending into the deep. News spread quickly, and soon researchers and divers from around the world came to see the site for themselves. The more they looked, the stranger it appeared. Blocks of stone aligned in straight lines. Platforms rose like stages, while steps seemed to connect one level to another. Some even claimed to see features resembling roads, gates, or the outlines of buildings. Yet the mystery is not so easily solved. Geologists point out that the rocks of Yonaguni are made of sandstone, which naturally fractures into flat surfaces over time. Currents and earthquakes can split the stone into shapes that appear regular, even geometric, according to this explanation. The pyramids of Yonaguni are an illusion created by nature, nothing more than weathered rock. Still, divers who swim over the site find it difficult to believe that such clean angles and sharp edges are entirely accidental. Imagine yourself drifting above those terraces, the water clear and calm, the shapes below rising and falling like the foundations of a forgotten city. The steps are wide enough to walk across, and the platforms are large enough to hold gatherings. Some divers even describe what they think could be pillars or archways. Though such claims are contested, whether man-made or natural, the structures inspire a sense of eerie familiarity, as if you are looking down on something that was once alive with people, now swallowed by silence. The scale of the site only adds to the mystery. Some of the terraces are tens of meters across, and the whole formation stretches over hundreds of meters. If it were man-made, it would represent a feat of engineering from an age long before Japan's recorded history. The earliest known civilizations in the region, like the Jomon culture, date back thousands of years, but no written records or artifacts link them directly to Yonaguni. The lack of pottery, tools, or evidence of habitation makes the argument for a human-built city more difficult to prove. And yet, fragments of history whisper around the edges. Some archaeologists have pointed out similarities between Yonaguni as shapes and ancient structures in Okinawa or other parts of Asia. Legends of submerged lands and Japanese folklore stories of kingdoms lost to the sea also echo faintly in the background. It is tempting to connect the dots, to imagine Yonaguni as the remains of an ancient culture whose existence was erased by rising seas at the end of the last ice age. For now, the debate continues. Scientists remain cautious, emphasizing geology over speculation. Divers, on the other hand, cannot help but feel the pull of imagination as they swim across the monumental shapes. The truth may never be certain, but the mystery itself has become part of Yonaguni's identity, whether carved by nature or by people. It is a reminder of how easily the sea conceals its secrets and how difficult it is to separate human history from the power of the natural world. As you picture Yonaguni's terraces sinking into the blue, ask yourself, if it really was a city, who lived there? What stories did they tell? And how did they lose their world to the waves? And if it is only stone, shaped by time, why does it still feel so much like a place where people once belonged? The site of Yonaguni is unlike most archaeological locations because it resists clear interpretation. On land, ruins can be excavated, layers peeled back one by one, and artifacts cataloged. But underwater, the sea rearranges everything, stripping away context, eroding edges, and burying clues beneath silt. When divers descend into the waters near Yonaguni, they are not walking into an ordered excavation, but into a shifting, unstable world where nature, and history blur together. Scientists who first examined the formations in detail were struck by the sharp angles of the stone. Massive steps descend in neat tiers, some over 2 meters high, with right-angled corners that seem almost too precise to be natural. Large flat surfaces stretch like plazas, bordered by vertical walls. In some places, the stone appears to form corridors or road-like features. One ledge has even been nicknamed the Stadium because it resembles a set of grandstands overlooking a central platform. Such names add to the impression that Yonaguni is a man-made complex, even if those names are more poetic than scientific. But geology provides another explanation. The sandstone and mudstone of the Yonaguni coast are prone to a process known as jointing, where natural fractures create straight lines and sharp corners. Over thousands of years, waves and currents can accentuate these features, creating terraces that look carved but are in fact the result of natural erosion. Supporters of this theory argue that Yonaguni is a striking but entirely geological phenomenon, no different in principle from hexagonal basalt columns or other unusual rock formations found around the world. The debate has gone on for decades. Some researchers, like Professor Masaki Kimura of the University of the Ryukyus, argue the Yonaguni must be partly artificial. He points to features that resemble steps, platforms, and even what he describes as carved symbols or roadways. Others dismiss these claims, saying that without clear artifact pottery, tools, or signs of habitation, there is no reason to believe the site was built by people. The ocean, they remind us, is skilled at trickery, shaping rock into illusions of order. Yet even if Yonaguni is natural, its scale remains extraordinary. The main structure measures over 150 meters long and rises more than 25 meters high. For a diver swimming across it, the impression is overwhelming. Walls loom on either side, terraces unfold below, and the geometry feels almost architectural, whether carved by chisels or currents. The effect is the same. It feels like entering a space that once had purpose. The mystery deepens when considering the possibility of a mixed origin. Some scholars propose that Yonaguni may be a natural formation later modified by humans. In this view, the stone terraces were shaped by geological processes, but people may have carved steps or flattened platforms for ritual or practical use. Such a combination is not unheard of. Throughout history, humans have adapted natural features into sacred sites or fortifications. If Yonaguni was such a place, it could explain why it appears both natural and artificial at the same time. Mapping the site has been a challenge using sonar scans and photogrammetry. Divers and scientists have tried to create detailed 3D models of the formations. These maps show a complex landscape of ridges, steps, and flat areas, all aligned with the underlying geology of the seabed. Some researchers argue that certain alignments match ancient shoreline features, suggesting that the site may have been above water during the last ice age, when sea levels were lower. If that were the case, Yonaguni would have been dry land around 10,000 years ago, opening the possibility that humans could have used the formations before they were submerged. The thought of a site that old naturally sparks speculation. Some enthusiasts claim Yonaguni is evidence of a lost civilization, perhaps one that existed long before recorded history. Comparisons to Atlantis are common, though largely speculative. Archaeologists remain cautious, pointing out that no evidence of such an advanced prehistoric civilization has ever been found in Japan. Still, the sheer possibility is enough to keep imaginations alive, making Yonaguni as much a cultural mystery as a scientific one. Even without definitive answers, the site has become a magnet for divers and explorers. The water around Yonaguni is often clear, offering dramatic views of the structures below. Schools of fish dart through the corridors, and currents sweep across the terraces. The silence is broken only by the sound of bubbles rising from divers' tanks. For those who descend, the sensation is often described as uncanny, like walking through a place that should not exist, where every edge feels too deliberate, every platform too regular. Perhaps what makes Yonaguni so compelling is that it leaves us with just enough ambiguity. If it were clearly natural, the mystery would fade. If it were clearly man-made, the debate would end. But Yonaguni sits in between, suspended in uncertainty. It is this uncertainty that fuels its fascination, inviting us to wonder what lies beneath the threshold of history, what stories the sea has erased, and what fragments of the past still wait, hidden just out of reach. As the currents swirl around its terraces, one question seems to echo louder than all others. If Yonaguni truly was touched by human hands, then who were those people? And why has the rest of their world vanished so completely? The mystery of Yonaguni has now lingered for decades, and in many ways, it remains no closer to being solved. Every dive, every new scan, every fresh round of debate circles back to the same core question. Are these monumental shapes the product of human hands, or are they the patient work of water and stone? Yet perhaps the deeper value of Yonaguni lies not in a definitive answer, but in what it reveals about how we interpret the past and how the sea plays tricks with memory. Standing on the shore of Yonaguni Island, the ocean looks ordinary enough. Waves break against rocky cliffs, fishermen cast nets, and the horizon stretches unbroken. But beneath that surface lies a landscape that feels strangely familiar, as though it remembers something. Divers who descend often describe a sensation of déjà vu, of walking through streets or plazas that should not exist. The terraces rise in steps large enough for giants. The platforms stretch broad as courtyards, and the shadows cast by the afternoon sun shimmer across the edges, creating the illusion of architecture. For those who argue that Yonaguni was man-made, the site represents a tantalizing possibility that a civilization older than any known in Japan once flourished here, later erased by rising seas at the end of the Ice Age. If true, it would rewrite our understanding of human history in East Asia, pushing back the origins of complex societies by thousands of years. The idea is alluring, for it hints at a forgotten chapter in the human story, one that lies just out of reach beneath the water. But the absence of artifacts remains stubborn. No tools, no pottery, no inscriptions have been recovered that can be definitively linked to human builders. Without them, the case for Yonaguni as a city is difficult to prove. What we are left with are the stones, themselves shapes that mimic design, but could just as easily be nature as geometry. The sea erases evidence as easily as it preserves it, and so Yonaguni may always remain in that hazy space between possibility and certainty. The people of Okinawa and the surrounding islands, however, have their own stories. Folklore speaks of lands lost to the sea, of kingdoms swallowed by waves. These tales are not unique across the world. Coastal peoples have remembered floods and submergence through myth in Japan. Some see Yonaguni as the material echo of these stories, a reminder that memory often persists in narrative long after physical traces have disappeared. Perhaps Yonaguni is not a city, but a stage upon which human imagination has cast its longing for continuity, for roots deeper than the written record. In practical terms, Yonaguni has become a site of tourism, with divers arriving from across the world to see the pyramids. Local guides point out features they call roads, temples, or castles, and while scientists may frown at the language, the experience of drifting through the site is undeniably powerful. For many, it is less important whether the formations are natural or artificial than the simple fact that they evoke the sense of an ancient place. The sea has a way of giving ordinary stone an aura of mystery. What makes Yonaguni especially compelling is the way it mirrors other submerged places. Pavlopetri in Greece, Heraclean in Egypt, Dwarka in India all are real, documented cities swallowed by water. Yonaguni sits among them, but stands apart, because its identity is unresolved. It straddles the line between geology and archaeology, myth and fact. It reminds us that not all questions have answers, and that sometimes the act of wondering is itself the point. As you imagine Yonaguni now, picture yourself drifting slowly above its steps. The water is calm, the light fractured into golden ripples. Schools of fish weave through the terraces, Their movements the only life on the silent stone. The edges of the formations rise and fall like walls, but no voices echo here. No footsteps stir the dust. It is a place at once empty and full empty of people, but full of possibility. And this possibility lingers in the mind. If Yanaguni is natural, then it is a marvel of geology, a reminder that the earth itself can create shapes that mimic our own. If Yanaguni is artificial, then it is evidence of a civilization forgotten by history, one that left behind no records but the stubborn permanence of stone. Either way, it is humbling. Whether made by water or by human hands, it testifies to the immense scale of time, and to the way the sea keeps secrets longer than we can imagine. In the end, Yanaguni leaves us with a simple question, one that echoes long after divers resurface. What else lies beneath the waves, waiting to be discovered, half real and half remembered? Just off the coast of Alexandria, hidden beneath the murky waters of the Mediterranean, lies one of the most remarkable discoveries of recent decades, a drowned city, known to the ancient world as Heraclean. For centuries, it existed only in fragments of writing, brief mentions by Greek historians, faint echoes in myths, passing references in texts that seem to describe a bustling Egyptian port where Greeks and Egyptians once met. Many thought it a legend, confused with other names, or lost in translation. Then, in the year 2000, a team of underwater archaeologists led by Frank Gaudio stumbled upon massive stone blocks, colossal statues, and ruined temples scattered across the seabed. Heraclean, it turned out, was real. The story of Heraclean begins not with its fall, but with its purpose. In the late dynastic period of Egypt, this was a city of enormous importance, a gateway between Egypt and the wider Mediterranean world. Foreign traders who wished to enter Egypt by sea passed through Heraclean before reaching the Nile. Taxes were collected here, goods inspected, rituals performed. It was both practical and sacred, for in addition to being a customs point, it was also home to grand temples dedicated to the gods. Heraclean was, in many ways, the first impression visitors had of Egypt, a city that blended commerce and devotion. Diving among its ruins today, archaeologists have identified the remains of massive temples, including one dedicated to Ammon, one of Egypt's most powerful deities. Colossal statues of gods and kings, some weighing over 5 tons, were hauled up from the seabed, their features still clear despite centuries underwater. Imagine the impression they must have given to those arriving by ship. Towering figures gleaming in the sun, announcing Egypt's divine authority to every visitor. Alongside them stood obelisks, shrines, and smaller statues, creating a sacred landscape where religion and politics intertwined. But Heraclean was not only temples and monuments. Archaeologists also uncovered granite blocks that once formed quays, harbors, and canals, revealing that this was a working port as well as a holy city. Ships docked here with goods from across the Mediterranean: olive oil, wine, cedar wood, and metals exchanged for Egyptian grain, papyrus, and gold. Anchors, storage jars, and coins found on the site confirmed the constant flow of trade. Heraclean was both the threshold to Egypt's wealth and a stage for Egypt's gods, a place where foreigners came to marvel and to bargain. Yet perhaps most fascinating of all are the details of ordinary life that the sea preserved. Dozens of small figurines, amulets, and household objects have been found, hinting at the lives of people who live not in palaces but in modest homes. These objects tell us that Heraclean was not just a ceremonial center or a customs post. It was a city where families cooked, prayed, and worked. Children played in courtyards, priests carried out daily rituals, and traders argued over prices. It was alive with the hum of daily existence, the kind of details that rarely survive in written records but cling to broken artifacts. Beneath the sea, the question, of course, is how a city of such importance could vanish so completely that its very existence was doubted. Until recently, the answer lies in the fragility of the Nile Delta. The land here is soft, constantly shifting under the weight of water and silt. Geological studies suggest that a combination of earthquakes, floods, and gradual subsidence caused entire sections of Heraclean to collapse into the sea. Around the 2nd century BCE, as the ground gave way, buildings toppled, and the city slid beneath the waves. What had once been a thriving port became a ruin hidden under sand and salt water. Standing on the seabed today, divers see enormous blocks of stone lying as though dropped suddenly. Colossal statues tilted as if frozen in mid-fall. The silence is total. Fish swim between the legs of toppled statues. Seaweed curls around the outlines of shrines. It is as if time stopped in an instant, leaving behind a ghostly echo of the city's final moments. And yet, in the silence, the story of Heraclean becomes almost louder than before. A reminder of how quickly greatness can dissolve, as with so many sunken cities. The unresolved question is not just how Heraclean was lost, but what else it may still hold. Beneath the silt, hundreds of artifacts have been recovered, but much of the city remains unexplored. How many more temples, statues, and objects of daily life still lie hidden, waiting to be uncovered? And what would they reveal about the people who once lived in Egypt, as vanished gateway to the sea? When archaeologists began excavating Heraclean beneath the waves, they did not uncover a single ruin, but an entire cityscape spread across the seabed. The scope of the site stunned researchers. More than 60 ships dating back over 2,000 years, more than 700 anchors, and an astonishing collection of artifacts ranging from coins and ceramics to statues taller than a person. This was no small outpost. It was once one of the great ports of Egypt, a city alive with traffic, wealth, and worship. Among the most extraordinary finds were the colossal statues that had once stood proudly in front of temples carved from red granite. They depicted pharaohs, queens, and gods, their faces serene even after centuries underwater. Some were lifted from the sea in nearly perfect condition, weighing several tons each, as though waiting patiently to be rediscovered. To imagine arriving in Heraclean by ship in its prime is to imagine seeing these giants towering above the docks, symbols of power and divinity welcoming every visitor. Alongside these statues, divers recovered stone tablets inscribed with hieroglyphs, providing direct evidence of Heraclean's role in religious and political life. One such stele confirmed that Heraclean was the place where foreign merchants had to dot before entering Egypt. Taxes were collected here, customs duties paid, and religious rituals observed to secure divine favor for trade. It was, in essence, the front gate to Egypt, and to pass through it was to be reminded of the pharaoh's authority and the god's presence. Yet Heraclean was not only a city of monumental grandeur. Beneath the silt lay the remains of small figurines, household vessels, and jewelry, objects belonging to ordinary residents. Clay oil lamps, bronze utensils, and amulets shaped like protective gods suggest that daily life carried on here. Much as in any other Egyptian town, the sea preserved fragments of ordinary existence, the sort of items discarded without thought in their own time, but invaluable to us now. These artifacts tell us that Heraclean was more than a ceremonial entry point. It was a place where people lived in neighborhoods, prayed in small shrines, and filled their days with work and family. The discovery of weights, scales, and coins also confirms Heraclean's bustling role as a commercial hub. Traders from Greece, Phoenicia, and beyond would have arrived with goods, their ships heavy with amphorae of wine, olive oil, and luxury wares. Egyptian grain, flax, papyrus, and gold were loaded in return. This constant flow of exchange enriched the city and made it indispensable to Egypt's economy. If Alexandria was the intellectual heart of later Egypt, Heraclean was its economic artery during earlier centuries, channeling the goods of the Mediterranean into the Nile. The underwater site has also revealed a complex network of canals, bridges, and quays, which suggests that Heraclean was a carefully engineered city. Canals threaded through it, allowing boats to move directly into its heart. Much like Venice centuries later, these waterways connected temples, marketplaces, and warehouses, ensuring that commerce and religion were seamlessly linked. Imagine small boats gliding silently through narrow canals, priests chanting in distant temples, and merchants calling out prices on busy docks. It was a city of noise, color, and constant movement. But beneath this prosperity was a fragility that few would have noticed at the time. The Nile Delta is built on soft, shifting land. Over centuries, subsidence and earthquakes undermine Heracleon's foundations. Parts of the city began to sink, while floods weakened its structures. By the 2nd century BCE, the slow disaster had reached its tipping point. Buildings collapsed, quays slid into the water, and the sea reclaimed what people had built. Residents would have fled inland, carrying what they could, leaving behind the heavy statues and stone walls that now lie tilted and broken beneath the waves. The rediscovery of Heracleon has reshaped our understanding of Egypt's interaction with the wider Mediterranean. For centuries, historians debated whether the city had truly existed or whether ancient writers had confused it with other ports. Now, with anchors, coins, and temples spread across the seabed, there is no doubt Heracleon was not only real but central to Egypt's world. It was here that the Mediterranean and the Nile met, where traders bowed before Egyptian gods before continuing inland, where culture and commerce merged in a city that is now remembered only through ruins as archaeologists slowly piece together its story. The silence of Heracleon speaks in another way. It reminds us that even the greatest cities can vanish. Their grandeur erased not by enemies but by water and time. Beneath the sea's surface lies a puzzle half solved. With each new statue or inscription, another fragment of a life once vivid. And yet, the question lingers. How much of Heracleon still lies hidden? And what more will it reveal about the world of Egypt at its height? The rediscovery of Heracleon is one of those rare moments in archaeology, where myth and history overlap, where what was once thought of as legend emerges from the silt as undeniable fact. For centuries, Heracleon was remembered only faintly in texts, its name drifting through Greek accounts like a ghost. Herodotus mentioned a city at the mouth of the Nile where Helen of Troy and Paris were said to have stopped on their way to Troy. But later generations could not agree on its location. By the Middle Ages, Heracleon had disappeared not only from maps, but also from memory itself. Its story had dissolved into uncertainty until divers in the year 2000 brushed the sand from colossal statues and revealed that the city had been waiting there all along. What strikes visitors to the site today is not only the grandeur of its ruins, but also the stillness that pervades them. Where once ships crowded harbors and priests led processions through temples, there is now only water. Colossal statues lie half buried in silt, their features serene but tilted sideways as though fallen asleep. Obelisks that once pointed to the sky now rest beneath fish and algae. Entire neighborhoods lie flattened, their outlines visible only in sonar scans. To look at Heracleon underwater is to see a city that was at one time alive with noise and light, now preserved in silence. This silence is deceptive, though, for the artifacts pulled from Heracleon speak with surprising clarity. Coins stamped with images of Greek rulers show the extent of Mediterranean trade. Bronze weights confirm the precision of commerce, where goods were measured and taxed with care. Ceremonial objects and statues reveal the importance of religious rituals that bound commerce and faith together. In one remarkable find, a black stone stele nearly 2 meters tall set out the rules for taxation in Heracleon, as decreed by Pharaoh Nectanebo I in the 4th century BCE. Its very survival underwater is a reminder that administration and belief were inseparable here. Trade required divine blessing, and divine blessing required trade. But beyond the monuments and artifacts lies something more human. The small amulets, beads, and figurines found scattered through the site belong not to rulers or priests, but to ordinary families. These objects remind us that Heracleon was not only a ceremonial entry port or a center of taxation, but also a living city. People cooked in clay pots, lit oil lamps in the evening, and whispered prayers before small household gods. Children likely played on quaysides, watching ships dock and unload, their lives shaped by the constant movement of goods and people. In these details, Heraclean feels less like a mythical name and more like a community, no different in spirit from the coastal towns we know today. The story of Heraclean's loss also has a deeper meaning. Unlike cities destroyed by war or fire, Heraclean was undone by the very ground it stood upon. The Nile Delta is soft, shifting, and unstable. Over centuries, earthquakes cracked its foundations, floods weakened its walls, and the land simply gave way. It was a slow disaster, creeping rather than sudden. But in the end, the result was the same. A city that had once stood at the meeting point of civilization slid beneath the sea. The myths of its vanishing were not exaggerations. They were memories of the inevitable power of nature over human ambition. Today, the rediscovery of Heraclean has become a reminder of how much of our history still lies hidden beneath water. In recent years, archaeologists have begun to realize just how many ancient settlements were built on coastlines that have since shifted. Rising seas, earthquakes, and erosion have erased entire chapters of human history. Heraclean is one of the largest and most spectacular of these, but it is unlikely to be the only one. Each statue, anchor, and fragment of pottery pulled from the seabed tells us that the past is larger than we remember. And Heraclean also offers a kind of mirror to our present. As modern cities face rising seas and unstable coastlines, the story of Egypt's vanished gateway feels newly relevant. Heraclean was once a center of wealth and power, a city that seemed indispensable, yet it vanished, and for centuries no one even remembered where it had been. The water covered it, the sand buried it, and the world moved on. It is a sobering reminder that permanence is an illusion. Even the greatest of cities can disappear when the ground beneath them shifts. Still, Heraclean's rediscovery offers something hopeful too. What was forgotten for over 1,000 years was not lost forever. Beneath the murky waters of the Mediterranean, its story waited, patient and silent, until divers with lights and cameras revealed it again. Its statues now sit in museums, its steles translated, its coins cataloged, but its presence underwater remains. When divers descend today, they are not only exploring ruins, they are swimming into the space where memory and history meet, where silence still holds the echo of commerce, worship, and daily life. As you let the image of Heraclean settle in your mind, picture yourself floating above its broken temples. Sunlight filters down through the water, casting shifting patterns across fallen statues. Schools of fish swim through doorways that once welcomed priests and merchants. The silence presses in, but it is a silence full of meaning. Heraclean speaks not in words, but in shapes, in stones, in fragments that remind us of both human achievement and human fragility. And still, one question lingers. How much of Heraclean remains hidden? What other statues, temples, or objects lie buried beneath silt, waiting for the currents to shift or a diver's hand to uncover them? Heraclean is no longer a myth, but its story is far from finished. In the early 2000s, a team of Canadian and Cuban researchers conducting sonar surveys off the western tip of Cuba reported something strange at a depth of more than 600 meters. Their instruments detected what looked like enormous geometric structures scattered across the seabed near the Guanahacobibias Peninsula. The images suggested lines of stone blocks, rectangular shapes, and even what appeared to be pyramids or towers arranged in patterns. To some, the discovery seemed almost too extraordinary. Could this be a sunken city, a forgotten civilization buried far beneath the Caribbean Sea? The press quickly called it Cuba's Atlantis. The name was dramatic, perhaps overly so, but the sonar images were undeniably intriguing. Unlike shallow water sites such as Pavlopetri or Heraclean, this formation lay deep, far below the levels accessible to ordinary divers. The depth alone raised questions. If the structures were indeed man-made, they would have to date back at least 10 to 12,000 years, to a time when sea levels were lower and coastlines extended farther out. that would place them in a period long before the rise of known civilizations in the Americas, challenging everything we think we know about prehistory. Scientists, of course, urge caution. Sonar images can be misleading, producing shapes that look regular but are actually natural formations. Subsequent expeditions with remotely operated submersibles captured videos of the site, showing massive stone-like blocks arranged in ways that did seem geometric. Some appeared stacked, others aligned in straight lines, and a few even looked like the bases of pyramidal structures. The question remained, were these truly the ruins of an ancient city, or simply geological features shaped by natural forces? What makes the story even more compelling is the human imagination that quickly fills in the gaps. Cuba has long been a crossroads of history and culture, and the idea that a lost civilization once thrived here resonated with both myth and possibility. Some speculated about connections to Atlantis, the legendary island described by Plato. Others suggested links to early indigenous peoples of the Caribbean, or even to civilizations from across the ocean. The site seemed to invite speculation precisely because it was so inaccessible, hidden under hundreds of meters of water, beyond easy verification. Still, even setting aside the more sensational claims, the discovery points to something important. Much of human history, particularly in the Americas, remains unknown. Rising seas after the last ice age flooded vast stretches of coastline, erasing settlements that may once have existed there. If people were living in the Americas thousands of years earlier than once thought, traces of their communities might now lie underwater. Whether or not Cuba's Atlantis is truly a city, it is a reminder of how much of the past remains hidden. Imagine drifting down into the deep Caribbean water, far below the reach of light, guided only by the beams of robotic submersibles. Out of the darkness, vast stone shapes emerge, blocks that looked irregular to be chance, lines that seemed to converge with deliberate purpose. The water is utterly still, the silence complete. There is no way to know, in that moment, whether you are looking at geology or archaeology. But the impression is powerful, the sense that beneath the sea lies a memory of something forgotten, perhaps forever. And so the questions multiply. If these are truly ruins, who built them? What kind of society existed so many thousands of years ago in the Caribbean? And if they are natural, why do they echo so strongly the shapes of human construction? When the news of Cuba's underwater formations first emerged, it caused a stir far beyond academic circles. Newspapers and television reports quickly picked up the story, framing it as a possible discovery of a lost city. The term Cuba's Atlantis spread almost overnight, capturing the imagination of the public. But while headlines thrive on certainty, science moves more slowly, weighed down by the need for evidence. And evidence at a depth of 600 meters is difficult to obtain. The original discovery was made by Paulina Zalitsky, a Canadian engineer working with advanced sonar equipment for seabed surveys. The images her team produced were striking: rectangular outlines, step-like terraces, and what looked like symmetrical pyramidal forms. The shapes were far larger than anything a small community might build, raising the tantalizing idea of a monumental city that predated all known civilizations of the Americas. Still, sonar is not the same as excavation. The blurry images hinted at structure, but they could not confirm it. Later expeditions sent remotely operated vehicles down to capture video footage. What they revealed was equally perplexing. On the seafloor lay enormous blocks of what appeared to be stone, some stacked, others aligned in long lines. Some seemed to form right angles, others looked more like natural formations. The footage was enough to keep the mystery alive, but not enough to settle the debate. Were these blocks carved and placed by human hands, or were they simply the product of geology, fractured by earthquakes and erosion into patterns that mimic design? Geologists have suggested that the region's tectonic activity could explain much of the site. The Caribbean plate is geologically unstable, prone to earthquakes that can fracture rock and create sharp edges, combined with erosion. This process could create shapes that look artificial even when they are not. The depth of the site is another challenge. For it to have been built by humans, it would have to date back more than 10,000 years, to a time when sea levels were far lower. Yet mainstream archaeology has found no evidence of a civilization in the Americas capable of such large-scale stone construction at that time. And yet, the mystery lingers because the site doesn't look random. Some blocks appear carefully placed, some align in ways that seem deliberate. Human eyes are trained to see patterns, and when divers and researchers look at the formations, it is hard not to feel the tug of recognition. The mind insists, this looks like architecture. Perhaps that is why speculation about Atlantis rose so quickly. The story of a lost civilization wiped away by water has deep cultural roots, and the images from Cuba seem to match it too well to ignore. Still, beyond speculation, there is the sobering reality that vast parts of human prehistory remain undocumented. The coastlines of the Ice Age world now lie far below water, drowned as glaciers melted and seas rose. Settlements, if they existed, would be hidden there, preserved, deep or destroyed depending on circumstance. The site near Guanahaca may be only one of many such places, where the line between natural and human-made is blurred by millennia of change. Even if it proves to be geology, it reminds us of the enormous gaps in our understanding of early human life in the Americas. For the Cuban government, the discovery carried a different significance. It placed Cuba on the map not only for tourism, but also for archaeology, attracting international interest. Expeditions were planned, agreements drafted, but the sheer difficulty of working at such depths slowed progress. Unlike Pavlopetri or Heraclean, accessible to divers in shallow waters, Guanahaca lies far beyond ordinary exploration. Each descent requires expensive submersibles, specialized equipment, and months of preparation. The difficulty, perhaps more than anything else, has kept the site unresolved, hovering between science and mystery. Imagine for a moment what it would mean if the site truly were a city. It would suggest that, long before the Maya, the Olmec, or the Andean civilizations, another culture had risen and built in stone, only to be swallowed by rising seas. Such a discovery would rewrite history, changing our sense of when and where complex societies first emerged. It would force us to reconsider the timeline of human development in the Americas. Pushing it thousands of years further back, the implications would be staggering. But for now, we are left with fragments, sonar scans, video footage, and tantalizing shapes. No artifacts have been retrieved that confirm habitation, no pottery, no tools, no carvings. Without such evidence, the story of Cuba's Atlantis remains unresolved. The blocks rest silently in the deep, their meaning uncertain, their origins unknown, and perhaps that is the most haunting aspect of the site. Whether natural or artificial, whether geology or archaeology, the formations inspire the same sense of awe, that the sea conceals worlds we do not yet understand, and that beneath the waves lie answers we may never fully uncover. So we are left with a question that is both scientific and philosophical. Are the shape of Cuba the ruins of a civilization lost to time? Or are they reminders that nature itself can create illusions of design? And if they are natural, why do they so strongly resemble the work of human hands? The mystery of the so-called Cuba's Atlantis has never been fully resolved, and perhaps that is why it remains so captivating. It sits in the deep Caribbean waters as a kind of riddle, a place where imagination, science, and legend meet. Unlike the well-documented ruins of Pavlopetri or Heraclean, the Guanahaca site is less a city we can study and more a question we cannot yet answer. In this way, it is not just about what lies on the seabed, but about the limits of what we know and how we respond to those limits. One reason the site continues to fascinate is that it forces us to confront the possibility of deep history that lies outside the neat timelines we have constructed. If the blocks are natural, then they remind us that geology can mimic architecture so convincingly that our minds are tricked into seeing cities where none existed. But if they are artificial, then they imply a civilization of builders who existed in the Americas thousands of years earlier than we thought possible, at a time when most human societies elsewhere in the world were still small scattered groups. Either conclusion is profound. Researchers who have studied the images often remark on how pattern recognition shapes our perception. The human brain is wired to seek order, to see faces in clouds or animals in the shapes of mountains. Looking at the formations on the Cuban seabed, it is difficult not to imagine stairways, plazas, and walls. Yet the scientific discipline of geology teaches patience. Not everything that looks deliberate is human, and not everything shaped like a block is built by hands. The sea has a way of creating illusions, but still, even scientists admit that the shapes are unusual. Their scale and symmetry raising questions that cannot be dismissed outright. For ordinary listeners, though, the intrigue is less about geological explanation and more about the feeling of the unknown. There is something deeply compelling about the idea that a whole chapter of history could lie hidden beneath the sea, forgotten by time, waiting for discovery. Plato's tale of Atlantis has haunted imaginations for over 2,000 years, precisely because it captures this longing for lost worlds. The Guanahaca formations, whether natural or not, echo that same longing. They allow us to picture people who may have lived and built before the record begins, whose world was swallowed by water and left only whispers behind. The practical challenges of investigating the site make the story even more elusive. At 600 meters deep, it is beyond the reach of ordinary divers. Only robotic vehicles and advanced submersibles can approach it, and each expedition requires enormous resources, unlike shallow ruins, which can be studied season after season. Guanahaca remains largely untouched. What we know comes from a handful of surveys and grainy images, glimpses into a mystery that resists full exploration. It is as if the sea itself insists on keeping its secrets, and yet that secrecy may be part of the site's enduring power. Sometimes the absence of answers creates a space for reflection. The deep Caribbean is not a place of monuments and inscriptions, but of silence and shadow. In that silence, we are invited to imagine what might have been, whether it was a natural sculpture carved by tectonic shifts or the remains of a community that once thrived at the edge of the sea. Both possibilities are humbling. What makes this mystery even more meaningful is the broader context of rising seas throughout human history. We now know that vast areas of land were drowned after the Ice Age as glaciers melted and oceans rose. Millions of square kilometers of coastal plains disappeared, taking with them any settlements that once existed there. The site near Cuba, even if it is natural, is a reminder of how much of our past may be lost to the waves. If people lived along those coasts, their homes, tools, and stories now lie hidden beneath water too deep for us to easily explore. The question of Cuba's Atlantis is, in a way, the question of all submerged history. How much of the human story has vanished under the sea, and how much can ever be retrieved? As you picture it, imagine a descent into the deep waters off Cuba. The light fades, the world above disappears, and the submersible's lamps cut narrow beams through the dark. Out of the gloom, the shapes appear vast, blocky, and silent. They are too regular to ignore, yet too ambiguous to explain. Fish drift slowly past. The current hums faintly against the hull. You sit in silence, staring at structures that might be nature, might be history, and realizing that in either case, they are extraordinary. And when you rise back to the surface, you carry with you not an answer, but a question that has lingered for decades, and may linger for decades more. Were these formations the remnants of a city, evidence of a forgotten people erased by rising seas? Or are they simply the artistry of the earth itself, reminding us that not all patterns are human? That uncertainty is perhaps the truest gift of Cuba's Atlantis. It reminds us that history is not fixed, that the past is larger and stranger than we can fully grasp, and that beneath the waves lies not only ruin, but wonder. On the southeastern coast of India, Where the waves of the Bay of Bengal roll against the Tamil Nadu shoreline, stands the famous shore temple of Mahabalipuram. Tourists flock to see its granite towers rising above the sea, carved in the style of the Pallava dynasty more than 1,000 years ago. Yet for centuries, local fishermen have spoken of something more: legends of 6 other temples, long ago swallowed by the ocean, their spires still visible beneath the water when tides are unusually low. Together with the shore temple, they were said to make up the 7 pagodas of Mahabalipuram. For a long time, these tales were dismissed as folklore, nothing more than stories told by locals. But in 2004, when the devastating Indian Ocean tsunami struck the Tamil coast, something remarkable happened as the water briefly receded. Eyewitnesses reported seeing the outlines of stone walls and structures extending into the sea, revealed for just a few minutes before the waves came crashing back. Afterward, when researchers investigated, they found submerged remains off the coast, massive stones arranged in rows, foundations that hinted at once proud monuments now lying beneath the waves. Suddenly, the fishermen's stories no longer seemed so far-fetched. The origins of Mahabalipuram reach back deep into Indian history. The Pallavas, who ruled parts of southern India between the 4th and 9th centuries CE, were renowned builders. They carved temples directly into rock faces and constructed elaborate shrines along the coast. The shore temple that still stands today, with its weathered towers, was once only part of a larger sacred complex. Ancient travelers, including European sailors, wrote of seeing 7 pagodas gleaming along the shoreline. If those accounts were accurate, then what now lies submerged offshore may indeed be the remnants of temples lost to the sea. When archaeologists began underwater surveys near Mahabalipuram, they identified large blocks of stone lying in patterns that did not seem natural. Some resembled steps, others walls. These were not scattered boulders, but structures that appeared to be placed with intention. Sonar scans revealed still more formations, stretching outward from the shoreline into the sea. It became clear that the coastline here had shifted dramatically over centuries, and that temples once built close to the water may have been claimed by advancing tides and storms. The thought is both awe-inspiring and haunting. Imagine the coast centuries ago, with 7 great temples standing side by side, their towers catching the first light of sunrise each morning. Priests would have walked among them, bells ringing as rituals began at dawn. Pilgrims may have gathered here to offer prayers, fishermen tying their boats nearby before heading out into the bay. The air would have been filled with the mingling sounds of chanting, crashing surf, and the cries of seabirds circling overhead. It was a place where the sacred and the natural world met, balanced at the edge of land and water. But the sea is never still. Over time, storms battered the coastline, waves gnawed away at foundations, and little by little, the temples closest to the water succumbed. Some may have collapsed suddenly during cyclones or earthquakes, while others were slowly buried beneath shifting sands and tides. By the time Europeans began charting this coast, only one of the 7 the shore temple remained standing in full view. The others lived on only in memory and stories whispered by local communities, who believed the ocean had hidden them but not destroyed them. The rediscovery of submerged ruins near Mahabalipuram has turned those stories into archaeology. Divers have photographed large stone blocks resting on the seabed, aligned in straight lines. These discoveries suggest that the legends of the 7 pagodas were based on truth. The temples once stood here before the sea claimed them. Yet even now, only a fraction of what lies beneath the waves has been studied. Much remains buried under silt, waiting for the slow progress of careful excavation. As you picture Mahabalipuram today, imagine standing before the shore temple at sunrise. Its towers are worn, but still strong, silhouetted against the rising sun. The waves crash just beyond its walls, as they have for 1,000 years. And if you look out to sea, you might let yourself imagine the 6 others. Their stones now resting beneath the water, still part of the landscape but hidden from view. The sea has kept them, perhaps forever, but in the whispers of myth and the fragments of ruin, their story endures. And yet, one question lingers. How much of Mahabalipuram's lost temples remain offshore? And what would they reveal if the sea gave them back to us, even for a moment? When the waters of the Indian Ocean briefly retreated during the 2004 tsunami, the coastline of Mahabalipuram was laid bare in ways no one had seen for centuries. Eyewitnesses recalled seeing long stone walls, platforms, and even the bases of towers suddenly exposed, stretching out toward the sea before the waves surged back with devastating force. In the aftermath of the disaster, archaeologists rushed to document what had been revealed. What they found beneath the water confirmed the old legends. The outlines of large man-made structures, aligned in rows, built with the same granite used in the surviving shore temple. The discovery was not entirely unexpected. For generations, local fishermen had spoken of the 7 pagodas, claiming that on rare days when the tide was low and the sea calm, parts of stone structures could be glimpsed below the surface. The Pallavas, who ruled the region more than 1,000 years ago, were prolific builders. They carved elaborate rock-cut temples inland and raised stone shrines along the shore, blending artistry with devotion. The shore temple, now a UNESCO World Heritage Site, had long been assumed to be part of a larger sacred complex. What the tsunami revealed suggested that 6 of its companions had indeed once stood beside it, now resting quietly on the seabed. Archaeological surveys following the tsunami mapped submerged structures, lying about 500 meters offshore. Divers reported rectangular stone blocks stacked in formations, some as long as 20 meters, others forming straight lines like the bases of temple walls. Some even identified what appeared to be step platforms, possibly the remains of temple foundations. These were not random boulders washed into place by waves, but deliberate constructions, their alignment suggesting human design. The sea had hidden them for centuries, but their outline still remained. What makes these discoveries so compelling is how they connect written records, oral tradition, and physical remains. Ancient European travelers as far back as the 13th century mentioned seeing multiple pagodas on the Mahabalipuram coast, glittering in the sunlight as ships approached. Local stories passed down for centuries told of 6 temples swallowed by the sea. Archaeologists, cautious by nature, had dismissed these accounts as exaggeration. But with the tsunami's revelations, the pieces began to align. Myth, memory, and archaeology converged, showing that the story of the 7 pagodas was not legend alone. The significance of Mahabalipuram's temples extended beyond religion. As a major port on the Bay of Bengal, the town was part of thriving maritime trade routes that linked southern India to Sri Lanka, Southeast Asia, and even China. Merchants would have landed near the great temples, greeted not only by bustling markets, but by towers rising over the water like guardians. To sailors arriving from far-off lands, the 7 pagodas would have been landmarks, guiding them safely to shore while reminding them of the gods who protected the coast. The temples were both sacred symbols and practical beacons, anchoring Mahabalipuram's place in the seafaring world of the Pallavas. The construction of the temples also reflects the Pallavas' ambition to blend architecture with the raw power of nature. Carved from hard granite, they were designed to withstand the salt, wind, and waves of the coast. The shore temple that survives today has weathered more than 1,000 years of storms. Its sculptures worn smooth, but still recognizable. Yet even granite has limits. Over centuries, erosion gnawed at foundations, cyclones tore at walls, and the rising sea crept ever closer. One by one, the temples gave way, their stones toppling into the water, until only a single survivor remained standing on the shore. For archaeologists, studying these ruins is a delicate challenge. The underwater visibility along this coast is poor, currents are strong, and sand often buries what lies beneath. Divers can only glimpse fragments at a time, blocks, steps, faint outlines. Mapping the site requires patient sonar surveys, careful excavation, and constant protection from the shifting sea. Each discovery adds another piece to the puzzle, but much still lies hidden beneath layers of sand and sediment. And yet, even these fragments are enough to bring the story of the 7 pagodas alive. The image of 6 drowned temples surrounding the shore temple is a powerful one. It suggests that Mahabalipuram was once not just a single shrine, but a sprawling sacred city. Its coastline lined with granite towers that caught the morning sun. As it rose over the Bay of Bengal, pilgrims arriving by land or sea would have seen not just one temple, but an entire procession of them, rising together as if to welcome visitors to a realm of gods and kings. Today, the shore temple still stands, its silhouette a reminder of the vanished complex. Pilgrims and tourists alike walk along its stone courtyards, listening to the crash of waves just beyond its walls. The sea that once destroyed its companions still presses against it, eroding little by little, threatening to reclaim even this last survivor. Standing before it, you cannot help but feel the weight of impermanence. What was once 7 has become 1, and even that 1 exists only at the mercy of the sea. As you let that image linger, consider how much remains unseen offshore. The ruins beneath the waves are only partially explored. How many more blocks, walls, and carvings lie hidden in the sand, waiting for another storm or another survey to reveal them? How much of Mahabalipuram's sacred city still endures in silence, unseen, but not gone? The story of Mahabalipuram is not only about the temples that still stand, or those that lie beneath the waves, but also about how memory persists even when stone is lost. For centuries, sailors spoke of the 7 pagodas, describing towers rising from the coast that shone like beacons at sunrise. Local fishermen repeated stories of temples beneath the sea, glimpsed in shadows when the tide was low. Scholars doubted them, insisting the stories were exaggerations, until the 2004 tsunami revealed what the sea had kept hidden. The ocean, in a moment of violence, had briefly peeled back its veil, proving that memory can outlast stone. Walking today along the shore near the surviving temple, you can almost imagine what once was. The shore temple, weathered and softened by centuries of salt and wind, still retains its shape. Its towers rise against the horizon, just as they did when it was first built. The carvings of gods and guardians are worn but visible, their outlines etched into the granite like faint whispers of the past. And if you let your eyes drift out over the waves, it is easy to picture 6 more temples, stretching into the sea, their spires catching the same sunlight, forming a row of sacred monuments that mark the coast as a holy place. The rediscovery of ruins offshore has also reshaped our understanding of Mahabalipuram's role in the world. It was not only a local pilgrimage site, but also a vital landmark for sailors traveling across the Bay of Bengal. The Pallavas were deeply connected to maritime trade, sending ships to Sri Lanka, Southeast Asia, and beyond. The temples, glittering on the coast, would have been the first sight for merchants arriving with goods, and the last glimpse for those sailing away. They were more than religious shrines, they were symbols of a kingdom's wealth, culture, and connection to the wider world. Yet, despite their grandeur, the temples could not resist the relentless power of the sea over centuries. Storms and erosion erased what human hands had built. What once stood tall and immovable now lies scattered and hidden beneath shifting sand. The lesson is not unique to Mahabalipuram. Across the world, from Pavlopetri in Greece to Dwarka in India, the ocean has claimed cities and temples alike. But here, the story feels especially poignant because of the survival of one lone temple. The shore temple stands like a sentinel, a survivor that reminds us of its drowned companions. The endurance of legend alongside archaeology is also striking. If the stories of the fishermen had been ignored, if the old tales of the 7 pagodas had been dismissed entirely, perhaps the offshore ruins would never have been searched for. It was folklore, passed down through centuries, that preserved the memory of what lay beneath the water. Science confirmed it, but memory kept it alive until science was ready to listen. This merging of oral tradition and archaeology is a reminder that history lives not only in stone, but in words, stories, and shared belief. And still, questions remain. How many more ruins lie offshore, buried beneath sand and coral? How large was the complex in its prime? And what rituals were carried out in those lost temples? Were they dedicated to the same gods as the shore temple? Or did each hold a different purpose in the religious life of the Pallavas? For now, the sea keeps these answers. The waves guard them as carefully as any wall or gate once did. As you let the image settle in your mind, imagine standing at dawn on the coast of Mahabalipuram. The shore temple is before you, its towers silhouetted against the pink sky. The tide is low, and for a moment, as the waves roll back, you see something more: shadows beneath the surface, lines of stone that stretch into the sea. Silent and patient, you blink, the water returns, and the vision is gone. But the thought remains that once, long ago, there were 7, and that even now, 6 still lie out there in the quiet dark, part of a story the sea has not yet finished telling. Not far from where the Nile meets the Mediterranean, another drowned Egyptian city rests beneath the waves. Its name was Canopus, and for centuries it was one of the most important towns of the Nile Delta today. It lies scattered beneath shallow waters, its stones softened by silt, its temples silent under the sea. Like Heraclean, it was rediscovered only recently, when underwater archaeologists searching the Bay of Abaukar found its ruins. What they revealed was a city that once rivaled Alexandria in fame, a place known for its wealth, its sacred shrines, and its reputation for indulgence. The story of Canopus begins in the centuries before the rise of Rome, when Egypt's delta was a web of towns connected by rivers and canals. Canopus was particularly famous for its temple of Serapis, a deity who blended Egyptian and Greek traditions. Pilgrims came from across the Mediterranean to worship there, bringing offerings of gold, incense, and oil. The town grew rich from this religious devotion, and with wealth came reputation. Greek writers like Strabo described Canopus as a place not only of temples but of revelry, where festivals filled the streets with music, wine, and dance. To them, it was a city of both sacred ritual and worldly pleasure, a place where gods and humans were honored with equal enthusiasm. Archaeological surveys beneath the Bay of Abaukar have confirmed parts of these descriptions. Divers have uncovered massive blocks of red granite, fallen statues of gods, and fragments of once grand temples. One statue of Serapis was found lying in the silt, its features worn but still dignified, a reminder of the cult that once drew thousands to the city. Coins and pottery scattered through the site confirm its long habitation, while anchors nearby reveal the constant arrival of ships bringing pilgrims and traders alike. Canopus was both a religious center and a bustling port, tied to the wider world of the Mediterranean. Yet the city's reputation for pleasure was not just an invention. Ancient accounts describe lavish festivals, with music and processions that lasted for days. Wine flowed freely, actors and musicians entertained crowds, and the riverbanks glowed with torchlight. While some writers condemned Canopus as a city of excess, others saw it as a place where people sought joy as much as devotion. In this way, it reflected the complex character of the Nile Delta, itself fertile, wealthy, and always open to outside influence. The fall of Canopus, like that of Heraclean, came slowly. Earthquakes shook the delta, the ground subsided, and the sea advanced. Over centuries, canals silted up, harbors became unstable, and temples collapsed. By the early century CE, Canopus had begun to fade from importance, overshadowed by Alexandria to the west. Eventually, much of the city slipped beneath the waves, leaving behind only ruins hidden by the sea. For centuries, its name survived only in stories of its festivals and its shrine. When divers found its remains in the late 20th century, they saw enormous stone columns tilted in the sand, blocks of granite that once formed temple walls, and fragments of inscriptions that spoke the language of gods and kings. The silence underwater was total, but each artifact whispered of processions, music, and ritual that had once filled these streets. What was once a city of noise and light was now a ghost, its memory preserved by the sea. And so as you imagine Canopus, picture both sides of its life: pilgrims arriving with offerings, priests leading rituals in the temple of Serapis, but also festivals spilling into the night, the air filled with laughter, music, and the sound of waves against ships in the harbor. Both sacred and worldly, Canopus was a city of contradictions that the sea has now claimed, leaving only fragments to remind us of what was lost. But still, the question lingers. What more lies beneath the silt of the Bay of Abaukar? How many temples, statues, and fragments of daily life still rest there, waiting for the sea to yield them again? The rediscovery of Canopus was not a single moment, but a slow unveiling. Archaeologists exploring the Bay of Abaukar in the late 20th century were already investigating the neighboring ruins of Heraclean when they noticed more stone blocks scattered across the seabed. As divers followed the trail, the outlines of another city began to emerge. What they uncovered was not just a cluster of ruins, but an entire network of temples, shrines, and harbor works, confirming that the ancient writers had not exaggerated Canopus's significance. Among the most striking finds was the remains of a grand temple to Serapis and Osiris, deities whose cults connected Egyptian traditions with the wider Greek world. Large fragments of statues were raised from the seabed, some carved from dark stone, others from gleaming granite. One colossal head, thought to represent Serapis, was recovered nearly intact, its features still bearing the calm, commanding expression of a god meant to unite cultures. Such finds reminded researchers that Canopus was not only a port, but a religious destination, drawing pilgrims from far beyond the Nile Delta. Equally important were the small artifacts, which spoke not of kings and gods, but of ordinary life. Bronze lamps, terracotta figurines, beads, and coins were scattered through the silt, suggesting bustling neighborhoods and busy markets. Some coins bore the marks of Greek rulers, others of Egyptian dynasties, reflecting Canopus's role as a meeting point between cultures. Even amphorae, the clay jars once used to carry wine and oil, were found in large numbers, silent evidence of the feasts and trade that defined the city's reputation. Ancient texts had long described Canopus as a place of indulgence, a city where people came not only to worship but to celebrate. Strabo and other writers spoke of lavish festivals where music, dancing, and wine filled the nights. The discovery of wine jars and banquet vessels offshore supports this reputation. These were not just supplies for survival, but containers of celebration, remnants of a society that embraced pleasure as part of its identity. For the Greeks who visited, Canopus symbolized both how the sacred and the worldly, a city of temples and of revels. The city's decline is written into the very ruins that remain. The Nile Delta is a fragile landscape shaped by shifting channels and soft ground. Earthquakes repeatedly shook the region, while floods eroded the city's foundations. Over time, whole sections of Canopus collapsed into the sea. Archaeologists diving today often find statues lying face down in the silt, as though toppled in mid-moment, frozen where they fell. Walls stand only halfway, their tops lost to centuries of currents. Unlike cities destroyed by conquest or fire, Canopus was undone by nature itself. Its end slow, uneven, but irreversible. One of the most remarkable discoveries came in the form of ritual objects linked to the Osiris cult. Archaeologists uncovered evidence of ceremonial barges used in festivals, where statues of Osiris were carried through the city's canals in elaborate processions. This confirmed accounts that Canopus was a key site for the annual mysteries of Osiris, a ritual blending death, rebirth, and renewal. Pilgrims traveled great distances to witness these ceremonies, believing them to bring divine blessing not only to the Nile but to their own lives. The festivals would have transformed the city into a place of light and noise, its canals glittering with torches, its streets filled with chanting and song. Today, all that remains of these processions are anchors, fragments of barges, and small offerings found in the seabed. Yet from these fragments we can imagine the spectacle: priests guiding sacred boats through canals, lined with cheering crowds, incense thick in the air, the sound of drums and flutes echoing through the night. The city would have glowed with firelight, reflected on water, a vision of devotion that merged religion with celebration. The rediscovery of Canopus alongside Heraclean has given archaeologists a new picture of the Nile Delta in antiquity. It was not just a stretch of marshland dotted with villages, but a vibrant hub of commerce and ritual where ships from Greece, Phoenicia, and beyond entered Egypt's sacred waters. Canopus, with its temples, feasts, and festivals, stood as one of the great gateways to Egypt, reminding every visitor that they were entering a land where gods and kings still held sway. And yet, even with all these discoveries, Canopus remains only partially explored. The seabed is thick with silt, the visibility often poor, and much of the city is still buried. Archaeologists know that many temples and statues remain hidden, waiting for patient work to reveal them. For now, what has been uncovered is enough to confirm the city's grandeur, but also to leave us wondering how much more of Canopus still rests beneath the water, untouched and unseen, and so the silence of the ruins lingers. The god Serapis no longer receives pilgrims here. The canals no longer carry processions, and the festivals of music and wine have been replaced by the quiet hum of currents. But the city remains, even in fragments, a reminder of how the sea takes without warning and how memory, preserved in myth and ruins alike, keeps what was lost alive. To think of Canopus today is to think of contrasts. It was a city known for its sacred rituals and its festive excess, for its devotion to gods and its indulgence in pleasures, for its towering temples and its fragile foundations. Its story reminds us that history rarely fits neatly into categories of sacred and profane. In Canopus, these elements coexisted, flowing together like the canals that once carried barges through its streets. What strikes archaeologists most about the rediscovered ruins is the scale of the sacred landscape, the Temple of Serapis, whose fragments now lie scattered beneath the Bay of Abaukar, would have dominated the skyline of the city. Pilgrims entering Canopus by boat would have seen colossal statues rising against the horizon, signaling that they had arrived in a place of divine importance. Yet the city was equally remembered for its festivals, where devotion spilled into revelry, and the line between worship and celebration blurred. Ancient writers alternately praised Canopus as a holy place and criticized it as a city of indulgence, proof that its character defied simple description. The ruins underwater tell both stories at once. The massive temple blocks and statues remind us of solemn rituals, of priests chanting hymns to Serapis and Osiris. The scattered amphorae and banquet vessels remind us of feasts, laughter, and music echoing through the streets. Archaeology rarely captures atmosphere, but here, in the mix of sacred and ordinary artifacts, the character of Canopus is still visible. It was a city that embraced both the divine and the human in equal measure. The collapse of Canopus into the sea was slow, but its erasure from memory was almost complete. Unlike Alexandria, which survived in chronicles and texts, Canopus faded almost entirely from view. Its name lingered in Greek writings, but without ruins to anchor it. The city became more rumor than reality. For centuries, no one knew where it had stood. Only with the rediscovery of its remains in the late 20th century did the city's voice return, faint but insistent, from beneath the waves. In this, Canopus shares something with Heraclean and with other drowned cities across the world. Each of them was once central to trade, worship, and daily life. Yet each was undone not by conquest, but by the quiet persistence of the natural world. Earthquakes shook the land. Canals shifted, seas advanced. Human pride believed these cities would last forever, but the earth and water proved otherwise. In this sense, Canopus is not only a story of the past, but a reminder for the present. No city, however powerful, is beyond the reach of nature. There is another layer to its story, though, one that lingers in myth. Greek accounts connected Canopus with tales from the Trojan War, claiming that Menelaus and Helen stopped here, or that the city was named after the helmsman of Menelaus' ship. Whether true or not, these stories tied Canopus to the shared cultural memory of both Egypt and Greece. It was never only an Egyptian city. but a meeting place of cultures, a space where myths and histories intertwined. The rediscovery of its ruins has brought the role back into focus. Canopus was a crossroads, a city of exchange, both material and spiritual. Today, divers exploring the Bay of Abakur swim past the tilted statues and massive temple blocks, the currents swirling silt over carvings that once proclaimed divine authority. They see coins scattered like forgotten offerings, anchors resting where ships once docked, and ritual objects that once glowed in torchlight processions. To them, the silence is striking, because it contrasts so sharply with what the city must have been, a place of sound, color, and movement now reduced to stillness. And yet, in that silence, Canopus still speaks. Its legacy is not measured only in ruins, but in what it reminds us about the nature of memory. Without the old writings of Greek travelers, without the stories passed down through generations, the name Canopus might have disappeared completely. Instead, when the ruins were found, the stories help archaeologists identify them. In this way, memory and material evidence work together, each keeping the other alive. And still, questions remain. How much of Canopus has been uncovered, and how much still lies buried beneath the sea? How many statues, shrines, and artifacts are still hidden in the silt, their stories waiting to be told? What can they reveal about the people who once lived there, not only the priests and rulers, but the families, sailors, and craftsmen who gave the city its life? These questions ensure that Canopus is not finished speaking. It remains a half-told story, one that will continue to grow as the sea slowly yields more of its secrets. So when you think of Canopus, imagine both what is known and what is still hidden. Picture the grand temples, the barges of Osiris gliding through canals, the music and laughter of festivals by torchlight. Then picture the silence of the seabed, where statues lie tilted and coins rest. Untouched, between these two images lies the truth of Canopus, a city that was once alive, then forgotten, and now remembered again. Its legacy preserved not only in ruins, but in the reminder that nothing built by human hands is beyond the reach of time and tide. And perhaps the greatest question of all is this: how many more Canopuses lie beneath the sea? Cities whose names we have forgotten entirely, waiting in silence for their stories to be told once more.